Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dr. Taylor Clem. I'm with IFAS Extension in Nassau County. I've been in Nassau County for just a month now, but I'm really excited that I'm able to come and speak with you on this program because I know that myself and the Master Gardener volunteers in Nassau are really excited that we can begin doing some outreach and education for the community. And this kind of webinar is a great platform that can allow us to do that. And we're thinking about what could be some fun programs or easy programs that we can start to do. You know, one of the most popular ones, especially this time of year, is starting your vegetable garden because our fall gardens or being able to plant in the cooler times of year in Florida, that is the most ideal where you have a lot of diversity in what you can plant. So our goal today is to talk a lot about how to start that vegetable garden, how to site it, some problems that you might encounter. But our goal is to really get you excited about wanting to start a garden in hopes that you go out and either tend to the garden that you have, or maybe if you're new to gardening, it could be something that you can start for the very first time. So to really get us going, I have a poll that I'm going to throw up on your screen. Fill this out or select the best response for you, but it says, do you currently have a vegetable garden? So a lot of them say yes, but it's like different kinds. It's like, yes, and I garden every day, but I garden occasionally, or yes, but I don't really use it often. Kind of just sits there, and when I get excited, I go out and garden. But also, no, I don't have a garden. How many of you do not have a garden? Any of them, or any of you all here? So wonderful. Oh man, everybody responded. That's great. Wonderful. Oh, we still have a couple. I miscounted. So we've got a couple that we can send in responses. So yeah, and I'll end the poll here in a second, and then you all will be able to kind of see what those results are. So I'll go ahead and end poll, share results, so you all can look at it. So it looks like majority of the people that are here today says yes, and I garden every day, which is awesome. And I know some of you do because I see Master Gardener volunteers in the list of participants. But but the yes, but I garden occasionally, and then the yes, but I don't really use it often. And then there's the no, but I would like to start vegetable gardening soon, which is awesome. And I think, you know, even though we have a lot of people here that are experienced in gardening and they garden every single day, you know, this program really reaches out to the I want to start a garden, or really start to learn a lot of those tips and tricks about vegetable gardening that can help you become better. So really, there's a lot of there's a wide breadth of things that we're going to talk about today. That whether you're brand new or have never done it before, or you're gardening every day, it's something that you'll be able to learn from. So let's go ahead and get going. And our essential questions for today. So these essential questions, these are like the big questions I like to ask at the beginning of every program that I do. These essential questions essentially are those broad questions that after we go through the program, you should be able to confidently or comfortably be able to answer some of these questions or answer these three questions. So as part of our program today, you're going to be able to help answer these questions. How do I plan and design my vegetable garden? What are common vegetables and fruits grown? Well, it says Alachua County, sorry. So it's in Nassau. And then how do I manage my garden? So let's go ahead and let's talk about planning and designing a vegetable garden. So when we're thinking about a garden, there's a couple things that you need to consider: the location, the type of garden, and where does a garden start? You know, that's a good question, is where does a garden start? And we'll talk about that a little bit. So first, let's talk about location. In the chat box, go ahead and put down a list of things that you think would be important when thinking about your garden location. If you want to start a new garden, or where would you like to put it? What's an important thing about location? Absolutely. Ooh, that's a really good one. Don't worry, I'll run over all these. Give everybody an opportunity to send something in. Yeah, so we're getting a lot of things like light, access to water, good drainage. Where's your water going to be coming from? Sunshade conditions, orientation can be important. So orientation means like, is it going to be the beds, if they're like rectangles, are you running north-south or east-west? So wonderful. Yeah, critters, proximity to home. So there's a lot of different things that can really dictate and determine what really influences the layout and location of your vegetable garden. So you do need at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. You need to have it near a water source. I felt so bad one time because I was working with the client or helping the client, and they just built this brand new vegetable garden. It was wonderful, but there was water. The closest water source is like 300 feet away. I was like, oh no. So they're gonna have to run like buckets of water or really long hose all the time. So really think about that accessibility to water. And also try to keep the vegetable garden away from buildings or competing trees. You don't want the shade of trees to end up competing against your vegetable garden, or sometimes some trees have specific chemical properties that can actually cause or prevent a lot of the plants within your vegetable garden to grow. A great example is like a pig nut hickory. Pig nut hickory has what we call allelopathic chemical, so it's like a natural herbicide, and it can really prevent your garden from being successful. So really making sure that you're away from any type of competing trees, as well as needing well-drained soils. So for a lot of time, if we're doing vegetable gardens, we're really going to have a raised bed. But sometimes if we're going to do like a traditional garden type where we're in the ground, we're going to want to make sure that we have really good, well-drained soils. Because the plants, the vegetables, the fruit that you're growing, they really like water, but they don't like having wet feet. So they need to make sure that water can leave the soil pretty quickly. If we're any excess water, it can leave the soil pretty quickly. So when thinking about the orientation, think about that sun position throughout the year. So in the summer, our sun's obviously sitting the highest point in the sky. And in the winter, it's going to be sitting at its lowest point. So really think about maybe on that southern exposure of a home, the southern side of the home, as long as there's open space for that sun when it's sitting the lowest in the sky, that it can provide enough sunlight to your vegetable garden. So there are different types of gardens that you can have at your house, and it really depends on the space and size requirements that you need. So we're thinking like, going back to talking about location, you know, where are you going to put some of the vegetable gardens? Do you have the space? Do you live in an apartment or a condo? You obviously may or may not have that ability to be able to put in like a raised garden or do like a traditional bed. So there's other ways that we're thinking about what space do we have available can really help determine the type of garden that we do create. But the nice thing is, no matter what type of space you live in, there is multiple ways that you can actually produce food. So with our program today, we're going to be focusing on traditional gardening. We'll be talking about that raised bed gardening and container gardening. We're not going to be talking about hydroponics or growing foods indoors, as well as there's some other low light sustainable food production that you can do at your home as well. But we're going to be focusing on these today. So traditional gardening, you are all probably familiar with that. Traditional gardening is you're just tilling the land, you're planting directly into the ground, sowing seeds, starting starts, and this is a great method if you have a lot of space where you can grow a lot of plants in the ground. Especially if you're wanting to do a lot of production. This ends up being the most economical. But one of the drawbacks is that you don't have a lot of control over your soil conditions. And that's where a raised bed garden comes from, what can be in handy. So you're just building these beds up and you're mixing your own soil, or you're bringing your own soil in, and allows you to, on a smaller footprint, have much better control over your soil or create a soil that's most ideal for having your own vegetable garden. And we'll talk a little bit about creating your soils here in a minute. And then the last is container gardening. There's so many ways that you can grow food, and container garden is easy peasy. If you find just a couple pots or containers that you have around your home or the local store, that you have the ability to put different plants and starts in those and grow them very successfully. And this is wonderful for anybody that has like a patio or you don't have the space to do a traditional or raised bed gardening. This is a great alternative because you can have a lot of control over your soil, and as well as you can actually move plants in and out as needed. So if we have any like bad temperatures, whether it be really, really hot temperatures or really cold temperatures, you can easily move plants around and get them protection to help make sure that you can continue production. A great example is I know somebody that was able to control heat and cold temperatures on their strawberries, and they're able to have a strawberry that was producing almost year round. You can probably go all year if you do it exactly right. But they had one plant that came in with a strawberry start, and next thing you know, it was growing strawberries almost and fruiting almost the entire year. And that was one of the benefits they have that container garden is they can move those containers around as need. So another one that I forgot to mention that's also really neat, and we're seeing this more happen in the landscape, is edible landscapes. So we've always had the dichotomy. It was like you have your food production and you have your ornamental vegetable beds. Or sorry, you had your ornamental beds. They were completely separate. But it's like, well, yeah, vegetables and fruit, all the things that we're growing for consumptive purposes are beautiful. They look really cool. They have really neat aesthetic qualities to them. So it's like, why don't we just put edible plants in with our traditional ornamental beds, and we can treat them like as annuals or perennials in an ornamental bed. So we're getting that, we're using that aesthetic quality of food producing plant material, and we're able to then have it within that aesthetic quality of an ornamental bed. So it's just like overlapping the two, and you're just hiding a bunch of edible food around your landscape. So it's really, really neat. Oh, great question. Great question. Do containers need to be food grade? So no. In this situation, no. The containers do not need to be food grade. But one thing that I would recommend is making sure that you have containers that are that have UV resistance. Some of them do not, and they'll just break apart within our first year of use. They don't last too long. So I usually prefer like heavier duty clay or like ceramic and clay pots, some of the big ornamental ones. But you don't have to worry too much about the food grade containers for the edible plants. That's a very good question. Now, if we were storing food in them, yes, they would have to be food grade like you'd see a pickle barrel or something like that. So where to start? So, you decided in your home, it's like, oh, I'm going to have my garden here. And now I want to make sure that I'm going to do this type of gardening. But where do we start? In the chat box, what's one of the first things that you need next? What do you think is the thing that we need to consider when we're starting or thinking about our vegetable garden? Put that in the chat box. What do we need to think about? I talked about it briefly earlier, and this image should be a good clue. I'm sorry, I'm back. We have a storm here and I just lost internet connection. Let me get going again. All right, can you all hear me again? All right, excellent. Sorry, we have a big thunderstorm coming in. It knocked out our internet. So hopefully it doesn't happen again, but I'll be back if it does. Wonderful. All right, so we were talking about soil, and it's the foundation of all of the things in our garden. So understanding our soil allows us to make sure that we have a successful garden. So there's a bunch of different ways. The first thing I always start, no matter if it's a vegetable garden or an ornamental garden, anything that you're planting or growing, at least once a year, do a soil test. Do that soil test so we can determine that pH. And you can do that soil test. You can reach out to our office. We have the soils lab on US campus where you can do a test. But really, the soil pH is going to be really important because that can determine how well the soil holds on to the nutrients. And that can determine how much nutrients are available for plants to uptake. So there's a lot of things that we could talk about with the soil science, but understanding that having a strong, healthy soil is the most important thing. So a soil pH that's most ideal is 6.5, so slightly acidic. Now there are some plants, so if you wanted to grow blueberries, you'd have to have a much more acidic soil. But nonetheless, that 6.5 is a really good ideal, slightly acidic is going to be best. And you can kind of fluctuate a little around there and it's totally fine. So understanding the soil pH through soil test, because you can also add organic matter to help with that landscape, that soils, or you can build your own soils. And this is really common with a lot of homeowners who are doing their own raised beds. It's like, I built this bed and now I need to fill it with soil. You could theoretically just go out and just buy a truckload of container potting mix and you will be successful. But this mixture right here, where we typically consider, we just call it Mel's mix. It's equal parts compost, peat moss, and vermiculite. And you just mix it all together. And that actually creates a really nice soil base that you can take that and you can immediately start planting. And then what you can do in subsequent years, you can always till in and add additional compost. And then it'll just slowly build the soil over time. It's really strong and healthy. But that Mel's mix, which is that equal part compost, peat moss, and vermiculite, it'll work out for you every single time. Or just buying some container media or planting media, you'll totally be fine as well. So the biggest thing is when you're buying your sources, make sure that you understand where it's coming from, that you don't unintentionally buy something that might have herbicide residuals in it, because then that can end up preventing you from your plants from growing. But as long as you're buying it from a reputable source, then it shouldn't be a problem at all. And it's going to be high quality material. So yeah, the soil test annually. Even once you do your Mel's mix, you can do soils test, but as long as you're doing a soil test each subsequent year to really see if there's any type of amendments that you do need. And adding amendments like additional organic material can really help out with the soil pH. It can help buffer the soil. That's a different discussion, but ultimately it allows the plants to be stronger, helps hold the moisture a little bit better, and the nutrients better for the plant material. So soil, that's the base of your whole garden. And this is going to be your step one, is to think about how important this is to the success of your garden. But say you already have your garden, the soil pH test, let's see what's happening. You can always till in more organic material if you'd like to try to improve existing beds. So let's talk about building a raised bed. So in building a bed, it really depends on how comfortable you feel in your skills. Are you brand new to this, or are you experienced? I usually recommend just start out small, and then once you get better at it, you can then expand it. But you can ultimately just configure and design and create a vegetable garden that works best for you. So what I recommend is that you can kind of see in the image on the right that we built these beds and they're on top of actually just cardboard. And that cardboard is just kind of creating a weed barrier or grass barrier to help separate the raised bed from any subsurface like weeds popping up, grasses popping up, etc. And then we just came back, once we filled the beds with soil, we just top dressed that walkway around with mulch. You don't have to do that. You can keep it open and bare. But you're putting down in that thin layer of mulch is just more for aesthetic purposes. But one of the things about the dimensions is you can have the bed as long as you want, but really thinking about the width of the bed depends on how comfortable you feel reaching in. So usually we say about 3 feet wide. You could do 4 feet, But 3-foot wide beds allows you to comfortably reach into the center of the bed without overextending yourself. Um, so you can do like a 3x3, that's what we have in these images, or you can do like a 3x20 if you wanted to, a 4x8. It really comes down to what's your comfortability. Usually I'll determine it based off of whatever board length that I can get at the store. It's like, oh, I found 8-foot sections, so, or 8-foot 2x12s. So what I'll do is I'll just get 3 of them, and I'll have a 4x8 bed, and that's pretty easy to do. And you stake down the centers, attach it. It's pretty straightforward. But having that weed barrier cloth, whether it be cardboard or something you could purchase like a weed barrier weed cloth, doesn't matter. That really help preserve the soil and the beds themselves to prevent anything coming up. But it's really important to think about what type of wood type you're using as well. So traditionally, treated lumber was not safe at all. But any of our new treated lumber that you can go and buy at the store today is going to be safe, that you can use to help preserve the beds. I have a tendency to just use untreated pine because I'm okay coming back every year or two replacing some of the panels on the beds. It's not too terribly difficult, but you can get some other resistant or rot resistant types of woods like the cedar, black locust, or redwood, but they're not always, they're going to cost you a lot more, and they're not sustainable, or they're not sustainable, some of them. So that's why I just typically just go to untreated pine. It's easy, it's cheaper, and I'm okay going in and replacing it every once in a while. So one question that we just have pop up is like, what about metal raised beds? Absolutely. So those like galvanized steel food troughs that you can get at like a feed and seed store, those work wonderful, but they're really, really tall. So they take a lot of soil to fill them up. So usually I line like the bottom of them with like wood and just debris and yard debris and stuff that's safe for once it breaks down, but it just helps take up a lot of that space in the bottom of that galvanized tub. And then I'll put in the soil in the top like 24 inches of that container. So then that becomes my planting medium. One question was, can concrete block be used? Yes, but I'm always very apprehensive because you have to make sure that you're careful using any type of concrete, because slowly some of the lime that is in the concrete can leach out, and that can make your soil pH go up. It's not going to be substantial, but it is something that just to be wary of that can happen. But if you have a bunch of concrete blocks just laying around, go for it, reuse them, repurpose them. But just know that the pH might be kind of wonky in a few years' time. So you might have to add some soil amendments to help reduce the pH and make it more acidic. And going back to the metal beds that I forgot to mention, is they are high enough so they're actually accessible for the most part. So if you're working in a community garden, or if you know somebody that has mobility issues, it allows to build a bed up higher very easily without having to require people to bend over. So if someone's in a wheelchair, they can easily get access to it, or someone's doesn't have the ability to comfortably bend down and stand up, etc. That raised bed just helps provide that accessibility. And those metal raised beds work out great, those big troughs, or you can just build them. You can raise them and build them up yourself with just materials that you have. So one way to start thinking about how we plan our garden is through square foot gardening. So square foot gardening, when we go work with schools or work a bunch of youth, this is the easiest way to communicate with the kids how we plant things. And there's square foot gardening guides that you can get online, and I'll send you some of the resources I have about square foot gardening. It's just a great way to plan your gardens. And I know earlier I said the beds were 3x3. These are obviously 4x4. But you can see in this image, because what we did is we just took twine and we just spaced it every foot. So you can see that we have 16 square feet in that box. And it's really nice because then we can say, okay, in each square foot, we know that we can plant X amount of whatever plant it is. So a great example is like a radish or a turnip. It's like you can plant about 16 of them per square foot. So you can select your square foot and then put 16 radishes in if you want to, or you just split it up. You can do radish and turnip. So it's a great way to help visually plan your raised bed, because there are going to be some things like a head of lettuce that might be 1 per square foot. So you can see your space, you can see what you want to plant, and it allows you to kind of just plan your garden out. And I'll send you a list of how many things you can plant per square foot. This is just an unbelievably easy way to help plan your garden out. So going back to designing, one of the questions was, what is the ideal height of a raised bed? So I'm going to answer that in 2 ways, because there's 2 ways I can interpret this question. So the actual height of like the lumber, like you can see in these images, it'd be a minimum of 12 to 18 inches. You can do greater if you want. We want to do 12-inch minimum depth. I know sometimes people go in to put 8 inches, but it just makes it harder for some of our root vegetables, like a carrot. I've seen it one time, a carrot, grows down, but it hits the weed barrier and then whoop, starts to grow sideways. So all your carrots look like little L's. So making sure that you have good soil depth at minimum 12 to 18 inches is going to be most ideal. You can go deeper than that, but it's not going to necessarily benefit you that much. Unless you're putting in something that needs deep root system. So like a potato could be a good example, but it's not necessary. The other way that I can answer that question is if you are building up a vegetable garden to make it accessible, I'd have to double check what the ADA standards are to determine what an accessible height is. I think I'm eyeballing it right now. I think it's like around 40 inches. 42 inches, that might be too high, 42. Somewhere with like 36 to 40 inches probably. That's what is considered accessible. There are specific guidelines that's set up by ADA standards that determine that ideal height for accessible things. So those are good question. That is a good question. I have 2 important responses. So let's go ahead. It's like, oh, okay, we've talked about how we plan our garden, our siting, our locating, and just the basic organization. So I want to talk about, again, I apologize, this is Alachua County. So we have some of our warm season fruits and vegetables that we can plant. It doesn't change between Alachua and Nassau County. So we're kind of getting out of this warm season, but we really want to think about our cool season now. Our cool season plants that I really like to start planting are our leafy greens, like our cabbage. Our cabbage, you can start doing collards. So some of the ones that I like, some people don't like mustard greens. I like mustard greens, but you can do lettuce. But I always like to, this time of year, like to do the broccolis, spinach. And these are our cool season vegetables. So these are the things that you're going to start planting now. But we do have some key dates that are going to start popping up in October, just around the corner, that we can start thinking about, like strawberries. Strawberry starts are wonderful plants to have within our gardens. But if you do want to have something like the cauliflowers or broccoli, it's important to start thinking about maybe get them in the ground now, because like with the broccoli, if you wait a little bit later in like February, you could have good production, but you just might not be the best quality as if you did it around this time of year for like that broccoli. So when you look at these lists, what's some of these plants it's like, ooh, I want to go out and I want to plant these now. Go ahead and put that in the chat box. And of course, this is not an exclusive list. This is just our common ones. If I had a full list of the things that we can grow right now, it'd just be ridiculously long. Or what are some of the things that you are growing? So yeah, lettuce. I'm excited about peas, to be able to start the peas in October. Oh yeah, spinach. Oh yeah, the arugula does not have a date. If the arugula mescaline, that is like September. It's similar to the spinach, if I remember correctly. But you can go September. Um, but I think it goes into December. I'd have to double check. That's a um, good question. So tomatoes, I would not recommend tomatoes now. Tomatoes are going to be best in the early spring. You can start them from seed in February and do transplants in March. Um, so really making sure that we're past the threat of any freezes. You could potentially put down some tomatoes now. It might be a little late because there are some fall planting. It's just not the most ideal time for tomatoes. So, but I'd always say try it out. If they have good protection, go for it. So this past year I was growing not evergreen, the Everglade tomatoes in the spring and summer. And oh my gosh, those are delicious. They're one of our heat tolerant cherry tomatoes. Ooh. And they never made it into the house because I'd go outside and I'd pick a big clump off the tomato and I just walk around and eat it in the backyard while watching the kids. So I never made it inside. But anyways, so, and I'll send you a calendar that actually shows the ideal planting dates with a lot of these different vegetables. And if you can't find a specific thing that you have questions about, you can always send those to me, questions to me, and I'll have my contact information at the end. So let's go ahead and talk about managing our garden. So you're selecting what you want to plant. You designed your garden, you're starting to plan your garden. But let's talk about some of the managing things. So water, always having to think about how you're going to get your water is going to be to your garden is going to be very important. It is easy. It's a little bit more labor intensive, but watering by hand can be the most beneficial, whether you come out with a hose or like you see in the image on the top right, someone's actually spooning it out with a measuring cup and watering that way. Just because what you're going to do is it allows you to, when you're watering by hand, you have much better control about water that you're putting down. You're only going to be watering when necessary, and as well as you'll be in your garden more. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be looking for a lot of pests, where if you just set it and forget it, you're going to come back and you might end up having pest infestation that you could have caught earlier. So you could set up the system on micro irrigation or a timer. That's what I've done at our demonstration gardens before, but just really making sure that you're out there. It's an easy way to get plants in the water. It's very efficient, but your eyes just isn't on the garden as often as if you were watering by hand. You could use overhead sprinklers, but I wouldn't recommend it. It wastes water. It's not efficient, and you're getting a lot of moisture on your leaves. And if you're not irrigating at the right time, and that excess moisture can just lead to fungal outbreaks or pathogens to come into your raised beds, which can invite other pests, etc. So overhead sprinklers just aren't ideal at all in a vegetable bed or an ornamental bed. But in this situation, I wouldn't recommend using them at all. So one question that came in is, what about the use of a rain barrel? It's a very good question. The simple answer is no, I wouldn't use it, because a lot of times we're collecting water coming off of our roofs, and there could be a lot of stuff like heavy metals or a lot of stuff that's associated with like bird waste that ends up in that water. So the water can be kind of funky and gross, and that could end up on your plants and can lead to like salmonella, coli, etc. So I don't recommend using harvested water from rain barrels in your vegetable garden because of the risk of what ends up in that water. So usually rain barrels and cisterns I restrict to ornamental beds. So let's talk about managing pests. I know I mentioned it a little bit earlier. So there's all types of pests that can end up in our garden. It's important to scout regularly, treat early. So if you go out and you're watering your plants and you're spending time in your garden, you can also make sure that you're looking for pests, looking for things that could be causing damage to your garden. And when I say pests, it's not just insects. It could be a fungus, it could be a pathogen, that could be like a virus, a bacteria. So it's a pest is anything in the garden, like that little bunny is chewing on the marigold. It could be signs of like nematodes. So scout early. When you're in the garden, look for the pests. Try to identify them so that if you can identify them early, it makes treatment much easier to accomplish. And then also when you're managing your gardens, never plant the same plants in the same spot. Rotate them around, move them around because nematodes are microscopic little guys that you can't see with the naked eye. But there's root knot nematodes, and what they can do, oh, if you have experience with root knot nematodes, I apologize. They're vicious. So what they do is they really impact, they are in the soil, and once they're in the soil, they're really hard to contain and manage. Usually we have to solarize soils in the summer to help control nematodes, but it can essentially, once you have nematodes in your vegetable garden, it's gonna be really hard unless you're doing a soil replacement or a solarization to really get them under control. But they will prevent essentially a lot of your plants from being able to fruit or produce. It really just stunts their growth. It causes a lot of issues. But there's always a bunch of ways that we can control them once we know what they are, what's in our garden causing those issues. So just managing our plant material, making sure we're watering appropriately, we're not fertilizing too terribly much. And that allows us to have healthier plants, which allows them to naturally ward off a lot of the pests that can impact them. But there's also a lot of beneficial insects that allow us to allow them to come in, or beneficials. I'll say they're not just insects, but birds, etc., that predate on some of the pests that might end up in our garden. But there are some insecticides that you can easily get, like insecticidal soaps. Don't make it, go buy it. Insecticidal soaps, neem oil, and BT. Between those three things, for most backyard gardeners, that's going to manage most of your things. Insecticidal soaps, they're wonderful. I say don't make it because you used to, but there's a lot of salts that are in the soaps that we use at our house. So you don't want to add salts because that accumulates in your soil. So you can get insecticidal soaps that have no salts in them. You do not, one question is, do you need to replace soil in your containers each season? No, you do not. You can amend it. You could replace it if you want, but it's not necessary. But if you do have like nematodes, or you know signs of nematodes, it's much easier to replace your soil on a container than it would be a raised bed. So I've had that happen, or I've recommended this. Like someone had a couple containers that had nematodes, so it was much cheaper just to dump out the soil and then just replace it with new soil, and it worked out fine. So here's the nematodes. They're the little tiny little microscopic things that live in the soil. You can't see them. Like if I had a spoonful of soil, there's probably like millions of nematodes already living in there. There's just a handful of nematodes that are not good, like the root knot nematode, and you can see the damage that they do to some of our roots. And that's a good sign of nematode population in your soil, where it creates all these little nodules. So all those little points, that's where that nematode has pierced into the root, and then the root swelled up around it. So that's how those little nodules came to be on those roots. And when that's there, then it's like, okay, we need to replace the soil, or we need to solarize. And the solarizing, what you can see this gentleman doing on the bottom left, he's laying out a clear plastic, and he puts soil around the entire edge. Because what that does in the middle of the summer, that heats up that like top 6 inches of soil really, really nicely, and actually forces nematodes to leave, or it kills them. And it's for a lot of home gardeners, it's like, we don't want to be gardening in the middle of the summer. It's just too hot. So you can always just solarize in the summers, and you can do like minor container planting if you want. So then you're just using that heat regularly to help control nematodes. So solarizing is really cheap. It's really effective. You can reuse the plastic each year. And what that does, it needs to be clear because it allows the sunlight in, and then the heat that's created from that sunlight, it's like a greenhouse, ends up staying underneath that plastic, and they can't escape. So it just heats up really, really hot. But if you had a black plastic on there, you're not going to get that benefit. It won't be effective. So you need to have like a clear plastic, or semi-transparent parent, like this gentleman has. You can interplant marigolds or plant them beforehand as a cover crop. There is a specific marigold called nemagon that apparently can help deter nematodes. And it can also make your garden just look a little beautiful. But the science out there is kind of iffy. Sometimes, like the most opportunistic time to plant your marigolds to have the most or best effect. So usually you'll see marigolds planted in around a vegetable garden, and that's just to help, just deter nematodes. But the easiest thing is, as part of your planning of your garden, is just rotate plants. Never plant them in the same spot. Think about how that garden will change throughout the year. And you can have like a 2-year planting rotation, and that's going to be more than sufficient of rotation to keep your garden free of nematodes. Or help prevent nematodes. So let's talk a little bit about pathogens, some of the other pests that we can't see. Majority of the problems that we see with pathogens when they're in our gardens are purely related to overhead watering, or they're overhead watering or just too much water. Ideally, what you're going to do is you're going to water early in the morning or in the morning time before 10 a.m., which is going to be ideal, because any excess water that's on the leaves as the heat of the day comes in, that excess water will evaporate. And then the plants are only going to be having the water down in the roots that they need in order to be happy and healthy. So water early in the morning, don't water at night, because if you water at night, then you have moisture sitting on the plants all night. And that's just gonna, with their warm temperatures, that's just gonna bring in fungus and pathogens right into the landscape. If you do notice any diseased leaves, just remove them, do not compost them, because some of our pathogens, you'll see them on the leaf, but they live within the soil, or they're soil-borne pathogens. So that helps prevent them from getting in the soil, because then that fungus will just pop right back up to the next thing that's planted. Most fungicides are actually good protectants, like a copper fungicide or that neem oil. They can really, really help. But look for any type of irregularities on your leaves that make you go, that's not good. And we can help determine what kind of fungus it is, or like what the best management that you can be. But typically a copper fungicide or a neem oil is going to be very effective. But really ultimately it comes down to water management. Don't overwater. With all the rain that we've had, previously you could theoretically say, we never had to water our vegetable garden because it was getting enough from just the rain itself. And that's totally appropriate. So you really have to judge it yourself, because the soil variations can really determine on when you need to water and when you shouldn't water. And then last is harvesting. So I always like to talk about, with harvesting, wait and harvest it once you think it looks like something you'd purchase in the grocery store. If it looks like something you'd buy at the store, go ahead and harvest it, but don't wait too long, because you might end up having some of your leafy greens do what we call bolting. And bolting are leafy greens. So essentially, if you stop harvesting the leaves, it'll shoot up its flower and it'll go to seed. And once it does that, you can no longer really harvest this very poor quality plant material. But what you do on some of your leafy greens, you always harvest the older leaves, start at the bottom and you work your way up to the top. And as long as you're harvesting leaves, the plants won't bolt, which is really, really neat. So just make sure you're harvesting when you harvest when it looks like you'd purchase. Don't wait too long so it doesn't bolt. But I do know some gardeners at the end of the growing season, they'll let the plants bolt, because then they'll harvest and store the seeds for that next growing season. So that's a good strategy that you can always do. Is like, all right, we've let this spinach or this collard run its course. Let's let it go to bolt. Let's let it bolt, and it'll shoot up its flower, and you just wait for it to go to seed, and then you harvest them then. And once you're done with an area, just add some compost, till it in the soil a little bit to help with that soil amendments, replace with some new plants, and then just know what you're putting where to help with that plant rotation, so you don't end up with the issue with nematodes. So I want to wrap us back around to asking those essential questions: is how do I plan and design my vegetable garden? So you should be able to answer that. You should be more comfortable thinking like, these are the types of plants that we can grow in the garden this year. And then how do you manage your garden? So now we're at the end and we have an opportunity to open up for any questions or anything like that that you all may have. And or if there's like any specific questions like, can this grow? The floor is now open for the last 10, 15 minutes of our presentation for any types of questions. You can put those in the chat box or the Q&A. So I'll stop the share real quick. So after after completing this program, what is one of the most important things that you've learned that you feel like is something that you can do in your garden today? So row spacing, that's a very good question. So row spacing is really going to depend on what you're planting, because some plants like corn is going to need a little bit further row spacing than something like a leafy green. So it ultimately depends if you're working them in a field. I've seen a lot of gardens, farms, they'll still manage 4-foot wide beds, but they'll include like an 18 to 24 inch space between the beds, and they just run them endlessly as far as they can. And that 18 to 24 inch space between them allows for them to access with equipment periodically. Kind of like I think it's called a tram line in agriculture that they naturally build in so they can get their equipment up and around fields. But the ultimate row spacing really can depend on what you are planting in the garden. So on the vegetable gardening guide that I will send you all out, that is typically going to be for seed. But it's typically going to be seed, but you can plant off those dates with starts, and it's going to help out. Usually, if you're doing the starts, you're going to wait until like maybe not right at the beginning of the planting time, but typically, well, let me take this back. So your starts, because they've already gone through that very sensitive, fragile period of going through germination and starting to develop roots, they're typically going to be a little bit tougher than if you're starting with seed. So you can pretty much plant those transplants at any time during that window. Yeah, so one person mentioned they like to do a 30-inch bed with an 18-inch walking space. Yeah. One question is, do I have a source for seeding transplants other than like Lowe's or Home Depot? I've always really liked what I can get from like the local feed and seed stores, like the Tractor Supply stores. Those I have always thought have been like really good sources. Again, since I haven't been here for just a little over a month, I don't know all the resources, but where do you all, outside of the big box stores, and if you like to get some of your stuff from specific locations around Nassau County? One person mentioned Standard Feed in Jack, so it's over on Beaver Street. I don't know that place. I'll have to go over there. I know where Beaver Street is. So one thing that I always do is I have a follow-up survey, and I'm putting it in the chat box, and I'll send this all to you in email as well. This follow-up survey, I do this with all of my extension programs. It allows us to continually evaluate and understand the effectiveness of them so we can make sure that we're making them better in the future. So I encourage you all to please take a minute. It doesn't take much time at all to fill this out, but I'll also include it in that follow-up email that I sent everybody. Yeah, so one person mentioned for seeds, they get it from just like gardening catalogs. Seeds recently have been really hard to come by. There's been a significant shortage of seeds, and it's related to the pandemic. Have any of you had any issues finding seeds for your gardens? And one reason that is believed that seed shortage exists is because during the pandemic, there's been a significant increase in home food production. So the demand just far exceeded the supply for seeds. It was just really, really hard to find seeds. Oh, just delays in onions and garlic. Well, that's good. Yeah, I think seed saving. We talked about seed saving. Maybe seed saving and starts from seeds would be a fun little class. You know you can set up like little grow lights in your garage or in your house, and you can get things started, and then you can transplant them and harden them off out into your garden. Save you a lot of money. That's also kind of really fun is if you have your own seeds, you have a lot of good friends that are sharing, you can share seeds among a lot of friends. You know, it's always kind of, you always need to be careful because when you buy seeds from like production, like distributors, they are scanning and testing for viruses that can transport and pathogens that can transport within seeds. When you're buying stuff, when you're just trading things with homeowners, that quality assurance doesn't exist. So there's always that risk. But you know, as long as you're getting it from a friend that you like, oh no, I haven't had a disease outbreak with this one. This one's a really strong one. Then yeah, it's fine. So, but yeah, I think that'd be really cool. And that's a fun, you know, class. Maybe we can do like a combination of like online, we can learn, but if people want to come in, we can actually do an activity where you're trying seed starting. That'd be really fun, maybe for the early spring. Because yeah, someone just mentioned that peppers are wonderful. Oh man, I love growing peppers, but those are fun ones to start from seed as well. So I used to live in New Mexico, so New Mexican hatch chilies, those are the best. And I always thought it was hard. You can never find New Mexican hatch chilies in Florida, so I was always kind of bummed. And then now I think Trader Joe's sells them. I'm like, all right. But you can always just grow them yourself. So I love growing peppers and tomatoes, of course. And I always like to tell people, is like, if you can grow a tomato in Florida, that's pretty good. That means I think you can grow anything in Florida because tomatoes are very finicky in our climate, in our soil conditions. I'm gonna put that link back in the chat box again. Of course, it should be fresh in your chat box because you all can't see the messages that I get. So after today's program, what is something that you want to go do in your garden? That made you go, you know, I'm going to try that. Or maybe I'll try certain plants, or maybe I'll try managing my garden a little bit more. What's something that you want to try to do after today's program? Oh, email. That's a good idea. I'll go ahead and I'll just share that last screen again. There we go. Yeah, leafy greens. Leafy greens are fun. You can get them in starts. There's a lot of varieties and flavors. So, and if you have kids that are finicky eaters or picky eaters, really getting them involved in vegetable gardening and growing their own food is, I mean, that's a gateway to just changing their entire diet or just letting them learn about how food grows. I really like when I get to work with schools and youth because of just the enthusiasm. I learned how to grow vegetables in my grandfather's garden when I was little. And just once you get that connection, you have a much deeper appreciation for the food and where it's coming from. But it just, you know, it gets the kids excited. So the kids might go home and next thing you know it, they're trying to grow some vegetables with their parents, and then the parents are learning how to grow stuff. So it could potentially just open up the door for, you know, family experiences or just in general, just the opportunity just to learn something new as a family. So which is really neat. Yeah, trying leafy greens and just planting the fall veggie garden. Yeah, this time of year, we're now just into that point where it's like summer's coming to a close and all of a sudden the gardening door is opening for the amount and diversity of things that we can grow. So much stuff we can grow this time of year. So the question, yeah, could I give an update on the Master Gardener Volunteer Program in Nassau County? So yes, so the Master Gardener Volunteer Program, I oversee that as the coordinator here in Nassau County. And it's been wonderful that I've already gotten a lot of requests since I started last month about wanting to go through the volunteer training program. So we do have a little over 30 active Master Gardener volunteers right now. And they're, because of the pandemic, it's been a very difficult time trying to stay connected, etc. And so now that's one reason we want to try to have this program today, to kind of say extension is here. And the Master Gardeners are really getting going, starting to do projects again. It's been wonderful to see. And we're looking at starting to do, it's going to be, usually we do the trainings in the fall. We typically do the trainings in the fall. But I'm going to look at my calendar just because of the delay since the last training program, just kind of get people plugged in. I'm going to see if I can do one in the spring, but we'll see if that's possible. If you are interested in going through that training to become a Master Gardener volunteer, shoot me an email. I have a digital interest form that you can fill out to make sure that you can get plugged in. The training program is going to be a combination of online and in person. So all the training modules that are required are going to be self-paced week to week. So each week you finish an online module at your pace. And then we get together one evening each week to go over what we learned in those modules, and we get to do a lot more hands-on activities. It allows it to be more flexible with the schedules of those that are going through the volunteering. Good question. Yeah, one of the recommendations for possible seed place is, yeah, southern exposure. Jackie, was that Colin that was in that presentation? Do you remember who was doing that presentation, or was it me? No, I don't think I was doing that one. It's probably Scott or Colin. Or if it was a recent one, could have been Julie. Yeah, so it's Julie. Julie name. That was her first presentation. And I hear she nailed it out of the park. It was a wonderful presentation. All right. Well, I'll stop my share. Are there any final questions that you all have? Because we're creeping up at 4:30 and I don't want to keep you any longer because, this is our scheduled time together. But, always feel free to reach out to me. Any questions that you have. Doesn't necessarily have to be your vegetable garden. It can be trees or ornamental plants. How do I irrigate? Landscape design, anything horticulture related. Just feel free to reach out to our county extension office. Our main office is in Callahan, but I spend times in between our Callahan office and our Yulee office. But always just feel free to reach out to me, send me your questions, and I'd love to help you all out. And I know our Master Gardener volunteers would love to help you as well. So yeah, so that's one point that wasn't brought up. So usually on the north side of our garden, like if you have anything that's pole beans, I like to plant them on the northern side of the bed so they don't have shadow. They don't cast shade or shadow over any other plant. So usually the taller plants you're going to put in the back, but we're usually only seeing that with like pole beans or anything that might need trellising. Or sometimes I've planted lemongrass in a vegetable garden, but I put them into containers on the north sides of the beds just because they have more height and I don't want them to cut out any sunlight. Good point. Yes. All right. Well, thank you all, everybody. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening.